Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the channel. It is currently 7:14 a.m. East Coast time, Sunday, December 1st. We're going to take a look at the Showdown, the Sunday night Showdown after the main slate, whether you're chasing your winnings or chasing your losings, whatever it might be, between the New England Patriots and the Houston Texans. Before we get into it, welcome back to the channel if you are new here. My name is indeed Sal Vetri, and I do indeed cover daily fantasy sports in the NFL, NBA, WNBA, and the MLB streets. Appreciate it if you take a couple seconds to hit that subscribe button. I saw some of the recent YouTube data that was updated, and if 51% of people who watch the content are not subscribed, so I really appreciate it. I give you that extra urge. If you just do hit the subscribe button, it honestly, as an independent creator here, helps me out the most if you hit that subscribe button. So thank you. I really do appreciate that. And also, if you're listening on the audio version, how those ears doing? Please do hit the 5-star rate and review. I do appreciate all the help there in the audio version. That is similar to subscribing. You could also subscribe to the podcast. 5-star rate and review helps out a lot. Content, exclusive content linked up down below on Patreon. Social media accounts, I release exclusive content leaks over on Instagram stories here and there, a couple times a week maybe. And then on Twitter, at SalVetriDFS. Free strategy guides linked up down below. That's all my stuff. That's all my plugs. Let's get into the slate. That is a dirty and messy slate. Houston, or the Patriots, originally listed 17 players questionable. They have recently ruled out one of their top cornerbacks, Jason McCourty, for this game, which is very impactful for how good this number one overall secondary has been. Makes it a little bit easier for Deshaun Watson and probably Will Fuller over anybody else to kind of get loose in that secondary, although still a difficult secondary. And the fill-in J.C. Jackson for Jason McCourty is still going to be a solid cornerback. So outside of that, the Patriots, like I said, 16 other guys coming in as questionable. The entire team, all of the wide receivers, once again, are question marks. Julian Edelman, questionable, seems to be the one that will likely play. Mohamed Sanu, Philip Dorsett, guys who missed the last week, seem to be questionable for this one. I would say that one of those guys probably doesn't play, if not both. It seems like they both are leaning more not to play than to play, but for right now, we don't know what that news is going to look like, so you have to just act as if they are going to play. For Houston, for the most part, they place an offensive lineman on IR. Outside of that, nothing really on their offense is all banged up. All the receivers are going to be healthy. Finally, Will Fuller's second game back after exploding for a 140-plus yard performance in the last game. It seems to be a fine spot for Houston health-wise on offense, as well as the Patriots. Nowhere near that, like we talked about. All the wide receivers coming in questionable. Some of their running backs as well, like a Rex Burkhead, like a James White. So we will see how this turns out. I will approach this as if Mohamed Sanu, and I'll talk to you what happens if not, but I'm just going to approach this slate right now if Mohamed Sanu and Philip Dorsett do suit up, but if not, it's a very easy fix. You just have their backup wide receivers filling in, who would then become interests of mine. Starting at the top. So, overall, 15 players are in a player pool right now. It's a gross slate. There's just not much here that I really like. Julian Edelman is a yes. He will see Vernon Hargreaves, who has seen the most slot, or has seen the most snaps and most slot snaps on the season so far. Not just for the Texans, because he came over from Tampa Bay when he got cut there, but a plus 17% advantage for Julian Edelman is well above average. Average would be 0%, right? So 17% more production is what they're expecting. Pro Football Focus here than average for Edelman, which is very good if you're going to get a 17% fantasy boost to Julian Edelman's average, which is averages 17.67 fantasy points per game. I do like that a lot. Julian Edelman would be probably my most secure play in rostering, if not in the captain spot, at least in utility. And Sony Michel, not a guy that I like. 10 fantasy points per game this year. He's priced at $8,000. Not a guy that I like on the season, but he has a positive 32% run blocking advantage this week. Number 2 on the slate. Texans rank 18th in rush defense. Michel's 32 red zone rushing attempts to his backfield mates. James White's 9 red zone rushing attempts. Rex Burkhead only having 8 red zone rushing attempts, or I believe 7 actually now. 7 red zone rushing attempts, so 32% advantage. If you're telling me that Sony Michel's $8,000 on the slate where everybody's priced up, I mean, if you look at the players that are $6,000 or more, even $7,000 or more, you kind of have all very meh feelings at them, right? I mean, Carlos had 6,200, very meh. Dorsett, if he plays 64. Sanu, if he plays 74. James White, 68, virtually a glorified slot wide receiver that has really no upside in James White, in my opinion. All these guys are just very meh plays. Will Fuller, 8,400. Now, before the news on Jason McCourty being out, I would say he's not even of interest to me, but now he is if he's going to have a backup cornerback on him. It's just a lot of guys who are overpriced for what their production probably is today, and potentially a very balanced and maybe even low-scoring affair here. So it's going to be Sony Michel for me. Positive 32% run blocking advantage is 32% better than average is what the production on the ground should look like for the Patriots today, and he's the guy who should be handling the bulk of the carries, and like we said, majority of the red zone looks right now out of this backfield. He has seen 32, yes, that is 32 of the possible 48 red zone rushing attempts so far this season. So very good production right there for him. He's pretty much seeing around 75+% of those touches. So Sony Michel, Julian Edelman are the two guys that stand out the most for me today in terms of rostering in my lineups. Then after that, Deshaun Watson. Not a ton of interest here because number one overall secondary, although they're losing Jason McCourty, which probably bumps them down a little bit. 7% pass blocking advantage. The Patriots do not have nearly as good of a defensive line as they wish they did, or as like another solid secondary San Fran has at their defensive line. But Deshaun Watson, if you were to choose a quarterback today, it would be him for me. There's just more mobility here, and I think overall the offense will work through Deshaun Watson in the passing game, even though it's a tough matchup, as opposed to the running game, maybe more so out of necessity of trailing. I'd probably lean not to roster a quarterback, believe it or not. They're just priced up to a spot where you can't get to them or you don't feel comfortable. Like, yes, 85% of the time, 88% of the time, quarterbacks, at least one, are in the winning lineup. But in those spots, most of the time, there's not two quarterbacks priced at $11,000 or more. I would be shocked, and I'd like to look at the stats of how many times a quarterback is needed when both starting quarterbacks are $11,000 or more in salary. I would be probably seeing somewhere around 85% of the time they're not needed, right? So I think if you look at those stats and don't add context to it, yeah, if you just say, oh, well, 85% of the time quarterback's needed, I'm going to jam in Deshaun Watson. No, well, look at the context of it. Probably the far majority of the time, one or if not both of those quarterbacks are not in the $11,000 range. They're probably in the four-digit range of $9,000, $8,000, even $10,000. When they start to hit $11,000 plus, a lot has to go right, and you're facing a stout secondary. So Deshaun Watson for me is a maybe only because if you wanted to play a quarterback, it would be him due to his mobility upside and probably more pass attempts in this game. But other than that, no real interest. DeAndre Hopkins. This might be the matchup of the year, if not the matchup of the last 3 years. In my opinion, the number one cornerback in the league, Stephon Gilmore, lowest passer rating against this year. He is literally the number one quarterback in the league against DeAndre Hopkins, who I believe is the best wide receiver in the league. It's open for debate, of course. You have your Julio Joneses of the world. Right, there's debate to who that guy might be, Michael Thomas, but I think it's DeAndre Hopkins. So that's a really fun matchup for the Sunday night game, seeing how Stephon Gilmore, I'm sure the news will be all over it for that game tonight, but you have Stephon Gilmore, NBC, I think it is. Stephon Gilmore versus DeAndre Hopkins. It's a brutal matchup. It's going to be a shadow matchup. Gilmore in 2019 has only allowed 30 receptions for 360 yards. That is 2.7 receptions per game for 32.7 yards per game. A load of interceptions, and he has the best rating against, 37.4 pass rating against. He has been absolutely dynamite. Now you get a really good wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins, especially around the red zone on a small slate. Like if this was a 2 or 3 or 4 game slate, I'd probably just fade Hopkins. But on a 1 game slate, he has to just beat him once in the red zone, right? He has to beat him once for a 15-yard touchdown. End the day with 4 receptions, 50 yards, and a touchdown. And even then, with his 16 fantasy points, even at that high of a price point, he's probably still needed because everybody on this slate, in my opinion, is overpriced. Will Fuller, I had no interest, but now that Jason McCourty has been ruled out, he'll see more J.C. Jackson. So J.C. Jackson filling in as the opposite cornerback on the outside. Jackson has been good this year, but a lot of his production has been in the slot. He was a slot cornerback earlier in the year, and now you have him going to the outside, which is a tough spot. So I think Will Fuller is a very strong player to get into your lineups now. He would probably be the guy who's closest to being a yes for me out of this Texans team. Mohamed Sanu, if he suits up, likely sees Jonathan Joseph. Joseph in 2019 has allowed 38 receptions for 434 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is 4.2 receptions per game for 48.2 yards per game. That is not good. If you are individually giving up over 4 receptions and almost 50 yards per game on your lonesome in man coverage in the secondary, that's not even including just zone coverage in the game. That's not even including what the other cornerbacks in your team are doing. That is not good. That's a lot of production given up, so a nice spot for Sanu if he suits up, although he is relatively highly priced. If he is to suit up and be 100%, I do like him. James White at 6,800. He honestly leans closer to a no for me. As always, like I say, he's virtually an overpriced slot wide receiver. He offers very little upside on most nights. He saw a season low 21% of the snaps last week. I would imagine that was mostly due to weather. They just kind of pounded the rock a lot. It was just a gross game, a slow game, not a lot of overall snaps in the game, but he did see only 21, which is the lowest he's seen all year. It was usually he's around the 40 to 50% range. I imagine that goes up here. So a little more upside, but 6,800 is a really steep price point. Philip Dorsett, if he was to suit up, would likely see Garyon Conley coming in here, who's a former Oakland Raider this year. Conley in 2019 has allowed 26 receptions for 389 yards and a whopping 6 touchdowns, 113.4 pass rating against. I would prefer Philip Dorsett to his teammate Mohamed Sanu if they were both to suit up. Just $1,000 less for just as good of a matchup, if not a better matchup. So track Dorsett and Sanu's status before a lock. Carlos Hyde is definitely interesting for me. You have the number 1 overall secondary with New England, but you have them ranked 27th in rush defense. They're not good in rush defense, just teams don't stay close enough with them. We saw last week Zeke had a fine game when you combined in the passing and the ground game. You had a fine game as a running back against this team. It's just a matter of can you stay close. Obviously, the weather last week for Zeke and the Cowboys overall was just gross. In general, it's going to really get sure footing. So Carlos Hyde, who, if the game stays close, we'll see 16 plus touches with the upside of playing 20 or having 20 plus touches, and that's what they should want to do here. Just try and slow the game down and take as least possessions as you can to beat this Patriots team. And yeah, I think that Carlos Hyde at 6,200 is probably one of the more fairly priced players on the entire slate. Patriots defense, you have it's ranked as a positive matchup for Houston's pass protection versus the defensive line, but Watson has 10 turnovers this year, 7 interceptions, 3 lost fumbles. Houston is 0 in the turnover margin, meaning that they have just as many turnovers on defense as they do on offense, whereas New England is number 1 with plus 19. So this team just forces turnovers. Obviously, they're the number 1 scoring defense because of pick sixes and things like that. So it's always a spot where we're at $5,000 at, oh, well, they're a defense, they're $5,000. What can I get around them? Not much. If these backup wide receivers in Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry, who are similar price to the Patriots defense, do not suit up today, there's really not much you can get around them. You can get Kenny Stills in the slot in a brutal matchup. So, yeah, I think the Patriots defense is in play today, averaging 17.54. They're right now ranked as the 5th highest average scoring player on this entire slate, which is just insane since there's 2 quarterbacks and a lot of good wide receivers on the slate. Just nuts, but they're definitely in play for me. Darren Fells, tight end for Houston. He runs the exact same amount of routes pretty much, if not less. This year, Jordan Atkins, who is cheaper than him by $1,400 on the slate, runs 1.4 more routes per week than Fells. So he's running more routes this season than Fells. Recently, it's been more closer to average neutral. They're each running like 20 routes a week. But you have Darren Fells seeing 70% more red zone targets. So Fells is overpriced in terms of how many routes he's going to run and really only see like 3 targets a game, but he's just used heavily in the red zone. So $4,200 Darren Fells, I have as a maybe right now. I think I'm going to make him a no. They probably work through their tight ends more. I'll make him a no live now because, look, I have both these guys as no's now. He's just overpriced. Like, you're going to get 3 targets. If he scores a touchdown, that's when you need him, right? Obviously, he'll finish with like 8 or 9 points if he gets the red zone touchdown. So, you know what? I'm going to go B, indecisive here. I'll make him back to a maybe, but just know that he's very high risk. Like, if he was 3,200, he'd be a great play. They have him as 4,200 as if he's seeing like 5 or 6 targets. He's seeing 3 targets a game. He's getting like 1 red zone target a game. So that's the upside there. Do you think his 1 red zone target out of his 3 total targets today ends up in a touchdown? I would say no more times than not, and that's exactly what you've seen this year. If you think it does, well, then at 4,200, he becomes playable. Both kickers are in play today, and they're more so in play than ever before, and it seems like they both have the same name. It's like Kai Forbath and then Kaimi Fairbairn. I don't know how to say these names, but if you look at those names, I thought they were the same person at first. Kickers are fine to roster. I think today they're a lot better to roster just because of like the value on this slate is pretty much just dusty old tight ends and like slot wide receivers who might not even be used today. So I think getting to one of them at most is good. Duke Johnson at 3,200. It's just a very meh play, right? He'll see more times than not in this matchup like 40% of the snaps. He'll see like 8 to 10 touches. If you think he gets there on 8 to 10 touches, I think it's fine. I like the upside, at least at the price point. The opportunity of 8 to 10 touches at 3,200 is very good, right? It just takes one play out of those for a showdown slate to be banked because of Duke Johnson. Ben Watson is my last interest. 30.4 routes run per week over the last 5 since re-signing with the team. Remember, he was cut and then he was re-signed. 3.2 targets per week, 2.2 receptions for 24.8 yards per game over the 5-week sample. I mean, that's pretty good. What that's pretty much shooting out to be is like 6 or 7 fantasy points. He's averaging, since he's been on this team, around what a kicker will score on this slate, but he's cheaper than a kicker. So I think Ben Watson at $3,000 flat is a fair player to go after. And keep in mind, one of those games, I think he laid a goose egg, so those numbers are even skewed a little bit more. He's averaging since returning about 5 fantasy points per game, but again, he had a 0 in there. You take that one out, he's averaging close to 7, which is a very good projection. You have the same projection as these kickers, again, about $1,000 less than the kickers. My nose as of right now, Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry, but this is what I have written for them. If I will only get to Myers and or Harry if both Sanu and Dorsett are out. Otherwise, if you have Sanu in, you're going to have Myers and Harry splitting the wide receiver 3 snaps, and that's just not a lot of upside at their price tags of $5,200 and $5,400. They're overpriced. So I need both of them to be out to have interest. If they're both out, I'd have more interest in N'Keal Harry than Jacoby Myers. Jordan Atkins, he has run 15 more routes this season than Fells, but he's only seen 3 red zone targets to Fells' 10. So for $1,400 less, he's getting similar usage, but that usage is pretty much just 2 to 3 targets, not in the red zone, any of them. So if his 2 to 3 targets, if he even catches both of his targets for 15 yards at 3.5 points, he's overpriced. If he was $200, well then, yeah, you start to get to him and have interest. But at $2,800, he can catch 3 balls for 20 yards and not be needed with 5 fantasy points. So, and that's like the upside there. Tom Brady at 11,200. It's solely a pricing thing. I'm envisioning Brady not being needed as much in this spot at 11,200. He has no mobility. Talked about it earlier and in past showdown slates. If a guy's 11,000 or more at the quarterback position, I take a hard look at them. If they have no mobility, probably don't play them. If they do, like Lamar Jackson, like Deshaun Watson, then I'd probably consider them more. So Tom Brady on this slate, I'd prefer getting to Deshaun Watson at quarterback. He's just too expensive. Kenny Stills ran just 20 routes last week for Houston because they played a lot of 2 tight end sets. They didn't go a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. He'd likely see Jonathan Jones in the slot, who's only allowed 2.2 receptions and 22.1 yards per game in the slot this season. I don't think Stills is going to be needed that much unless they get behind big and then they have to go force into 3 wide receiver sets. I think they'll do maybe more 2-back sets with Carlos Hyde and a fullback, more 2 tight end sets, right? With both Atkins and Fells as they've done for a lot of the season this year. So I don't think Stills is needed at 4,800. he might not run more than 25 routes, and that's just an overpriced then. Rex Burkhead playing less than 25% or around 25% of the snaps since returning. He's good to see about 5 touches, but at 3,400, those 5 touches don't really carry that much upside. His red zone touches are nowhere near what they were last year and at the beginning of this year. Michel's seeing 32 red zone touches this year. The Rex Burkhead seeing less than 10. He's even seeing less than James White this year. Obviously, he was injured for a span there, so a little bit skewed, but Rex Burkhead at 3,400 is always like a tournament flyer play. We've seen him in the showdown this year, kind of being a showdown for people, but I'm just not going to get there. Brandon Bolden, likely to see 3 to 5 offensive snaps, maybe gets 1 touch. He's had 1 touch over the last 4 games, so he's a no for me. Kiki Kute ran 0 routes last week as Kenny Stills moved back into the slot and ran 20 routes, and Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins controlled the outside. Matt Lacrosse has ran 22 routes to Ben Watson's 60 routes over the last 2 games since Matt Lacrosse returned from injury. Over those 2 games, he's seen 3 targets, 3 catches, caught all of them for 8 yards. So nothing really downfield. He's kind of a block and release type of guy right now, and he's behind Ben Watson in the rotation. So those are my interests. There's 15 guys. Only 2 that stand out as yeses. Will Fuller would probably be my 3rd yes if I had to get there with no Jason McCourty now. Hopefully this slate in this video of the slate helps you. I really appreciate it once again. I think it's 51 to 54% of people that are not subscribed to the channel that watch this monthly. Please do hit the subscribe button. Again, if you don't know what that means, it's totally free. It's the red button in the bottom right hand corner of this video. It takes a couple seconds, and what it does for me is it allows me to build a bigger audience, allows me to reach more people, which allows me to pick up more third-party advertising, which in theory allows me, or at the end of the day, it's not even a theory, it allows me to do this, continually do this, and spend all my time doing this per week for free over here on YouTube. So thank you so much. If you're interested in my exclusive content, that is linked up down below over on Patreon. Follow me on my social medias at SalVetriDFS on Twitter, SalVetri on Facebook, both linked up in the description below. Be sure to check out the free strategy guides below too, tips on NBA and NFL DFS. My name is Sal. Best of luck to everybody. Hit the subscribe button before you go. Hit the 5-star rate and review before you close out your phone and your podcast. Peace out, gang. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Above my head, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I do ask you if you can please hit that subscribe button. Helps me out a good amount to reach more people. You can also follow me on Twitter. That's over there. Right in the corner is my @SalVetriDFS Twitter. And then above, you'll find my Patreon link. You can click on that if you want more exclusive content for me. Or a video is going to pop up, so why don't you check that one out as well. I think it's going to be beneficial for you. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.